If I could have your attention, I would like to call the December meeting of the Northeast Ohio Sustainable Communities Consortium Board of Directors meeting to order. Thank you for coming out on this afternoon. I apologize for the late start. We had some meetings earlier and experienced some meeting creep from one to the other. But go ahead and get us started now. First off, if there are any local officials that are joining us today that would like to introduce themselves, I wanted to give you that opportunity right now, other than the usual folks who are always with us. Okay. Also, along those lines, I would like to welcome all of our work stream members and members of the Regional Prosperity Initiative Board of Directors that are joining us that were invited today. And if you folks would like to take a second just to stand and be acknowledged. I know both the work streams and the RPI have been doing a lot of important work this year, and we just wanted to use part of today to acknowledge that. So don't be shy. Great. Thank you. And then finally, as is our usual practice, I'd like to just take a second to go around the table here and introduce ourselves, and if you could just introduce yourself, your affiliation, and the work stream that you represent. Maybe David, we'll start with you if that's all right.
I'm David Beach. I run Green City Blue Lake at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History.
Greg Brown, Policy Bridge. Work streams are communication, engagement, and housing and communities.
George Garchar, Catholic Charities, Diocese of Youngstown, and work streams, housing and communities.
Mark Moore, City of Akron Planning, Executive Committee.
Holly Brenda, Mayor Valeria, Finance Executive Committee and Quality Places.
Pam Hawkins, Deputy Director, Akron Metropolitan Housing Authority, Housing and Communities.
Dan Maniello, Mahoney County, Vice Chair.
John Getchy, State Regional Council of Governments, Executive Committee and Connection.
Corey Minor-Smith, Stark Metropolitan Housing Authority, in-house counsel, and also on the Housing and Communities work stream.
Ron Shortis, Youngstown State University, Center for Urban Regional Studies, the Economic Development work stream.
Mary Beth Feek, Greater Cleveland Regional Transit Authority.
Hunter Morrison, Executive Director of the Consortium.
Kelly Harris, Administrative Assistant.
Jason Segedy, I'm the board chair and I'm the director of Greater Akron's Metropolitan Planning Organization.
Ray Scalucci, Executive Director of NEOSCC and Treasurer of the Consortium.
Tom Tyrrell, CEO of Great Lakes Biomimicry, Vice Chair of RPI and Secretary of the Consortium.
Gene Nixon, Summit County Public Health.
Mike Lyons, with the Regional Prosperity Initiative. I serve on the Finance Committee and the Communications and Engagement.
I'm Ed Jarris. I'm the Director of Regional Collaboration for Cuyahoga County.
And Brad Whitehead from the Fund for Economic Future.
Joe Hadley with NEFCO and the Environments work stream.
Jeff Dutton with the Stark County Area Transportation Study.
Bob Now, Stark County Regional Planning.
Shauna Doherty, Cuyahoga Metropolitan Housing Authority, Housing and Communities work stream, and also Quality Connected Places.
Bill Miller, I'm the Director of the Trumbull County Planning Commission.
Mike Challenger, Lorraine County Growth Partnership, and a member of the Quality Connected Places works.
Okay, thanks a lot. Next order of business on the agenda is public comment. I am told that we don't have any public comments today, so go ahead and move us on to item 3, which is the report on the Board of Directors and Executive Committee. First order of business under this is approval of the meeting minutes from our November 27th board meeting in Akron, and entertain a motion for approval at this time.
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Minor-Smith.
Second.
Second. Any further discussion, questions, or comments on the minutes?
Who seconded?
Joe Hadley. If not, all in favor of approving the minutes as written, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, the next order of business is a report out on the Executive Committee. We did have an Executive Committee meeting at 11 o'clock this morning in this very room, so I don't think there was anything that we did discuss at the Executive Committee level that isn't going to filter its way up to this group later on the agenda. So I didn't really have any anything further to report on that. If there was anything else that came before the executive committee that another member would want to bring up real quickly, I'll give you that opportunity, but I think we will cover everything later on the agenda. Okay, seeing none. Next order of business, I'll turn over to Hunter, and this is just a discussion of the board and executive committee meeting schedule coming up for January.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the annual meeting, which we elect officers, will be in Akron at the Urban League at 1 o'clock on January 22nd. The next meeting of the executive committee will be at our offices in 146 High Street at 1:30 on January 8th. And I think we have, the next item would be a report on the board member learning and sharing sessions. We have one coming up on the 19th this week, 8:30 to 1. This is the third of the 3 such sessions, which have allowed us all to get on board with the new work program, and appreciate everyone who's been able to attend.
Great. Before we move on, any discussion on that as far as members that attended those sessions? If there's anything you'd like to share, I'd like to give you that opportunity right now. Okay.
Jeffrey?
Jeff?
I just want to add that for those that couldn't make the sessions, we will be sending out packets to you, as well as, I think, a very low-budget video about some of the messaging things. So you'll be seeing that after the first of the year.
Okay, thanks. Next item on the agenda is the Finance Committee report, and I'll turn that over to Grace Galucci.
Good afternoon. Similar to the report that Mr. Segedy gave us for the Executive Committee, the Finance Committee did deal with a few items, but I believe they will be handled prominently under number 4, organization, speaking on the current financials and the budget update. But I did want to highlight a conversation that began in the Finance Committee meeting that I think will be very relevant for us to take up in the next couple of months, and that is that the HUD grant will be expiring on December 31st of next year. And we would hope to be completed with that portion of the project, but keeping in mind that we do have some commitments, like our executive director's contract actually running through June of the following year. So we do have some disconnect or some mismatch between the funding that we currently have and existing obligations, but more importantly, future obligations which might define the future of the organization. And so we will need to talk about either potentially looking to raise additional funds for the organization or thinking about taking the organization in a different direction. So that was a very important conversation that we had, and we will be bringing you more information on that in the upcoming months.
Great, thanks a lot. Next item under the beginning part of the agenda is the report out of the Technical Steering Committee. Hunter, is there anything you'd like to add?
As you recall, part of the reorganization included the creation of a Technical Steering Committee, which consists of the directors of the Region's 4 Metropolitan Planning Organization, plus the director of NEFCO, with the Council of Governments. We reviewed 3 areas. One was the MPO COG workshops. We've had 3, one in for NOACA, one for Eastgate, and one that dealt with the 4 counties that cover NEFCO, AMATS, and SCATs, MPOs. The attendance was good. It certainly could always be better, but it's the first step at really onboarding both board members and key staff people to the process of scenario planning that we're going through, and to give people a chance to go back through the conditions and trends platform and have some really good discussions about what those findings mean to them and their communities. We've recorded all that, working with our consultant at Cobalt, and that becomes part of the continuing process of engaging these entities. The second issue was a somewhat technical issue of integrating our work with scenario planning into the long-range transportation plans of the 4 metropolitan planning organizations. All 4 are updating their current plans. This will be out within the first half of next year to 2035 or 2040. It's pretty clear that our work on scenario planning can't really have much of an impact on that, but will have potentially impact on future work, but also on work such as what NOACA is doing with this, potentially with a strategic plan to provide data and input and insight to that. But importantly, we agreed that what are used for basic population and economic projections by the planning agencies in doing their work will be transmitted to our consultant team for use in creating the base case scenario. So we get consistency in what our view of the long-term future is as we also begin to look at what other options might be there. And we talked about the continued desirability to have full participation by all 12 counties and discussions that have been going on within MPOs about using their leverage match, in some cases significant overmatch, to enable some of their members who don't have the resources to participate as well. So those are the 3 topics we covered. And we then met jointly with the Finance Committee, and as Grace Colucci has pointed out, some of that will come out at the rest of the meeting.
Any questions for Hunter on what he reported on before we move on? Okay. Final item under this initial part of the meeting is the report of the nominating committee, and Mike Lyons was going to report out on that.
All right. Connie Kraus chaired the nominating committee, and she was not able to stay for this meeting. And I served on the nominating committee, Rachel McCartney, Bob Now, and Grace Colucci. I believe that was everyone. We did come up with a recommended slate of officers and regional members. The executive committee, just to remind everyone, is made up of primary representative from all of the MPOs and also NEFCO, which is not an MPO but is a regional planning organization. Fund for Economic Future, RPI. I think those are the standing positions. Then we also have regional representatives from each of the 4 MPO areas, and those are chosen by those, essentially recommended by those regions. For the Eastgate region, for the regional representative, we're recommending Bill Davignon. For the AMATS region, Gene Nixon with Donna Skota as the backup or alternate. The NOACA region, Freddie Collier with Shauna Doherty as the alternate. For the SCATS region, Jeff Dutt. So those are the regional representative recommendations. And that was with input from those regions as to who they thought should be their regional representatives. The directors from each of the MPOs are also on the executive committee. And then in addition to that, we have officers. And we are recommending for the chair position Grace Colucci, who is the, as you know, the new director of NOACA. And we are recommending 3 vice chair positions. We're recommending Jason continue as a vice chair for continuity. He served as chair this year. Bob Now will be the first vice chair. And Rachel McCartney we would add her as vice chair also to have on the executive committee. The treasurer position is defined in the bylaws as a representative from NOACA. So that will be the decision of NOACA as to who they assign to that. But we've listed Steve Hambley. It's our understanding that that's the individual that they would recommend. And for secretary, Fred Wright, who is the director of the Akron Urban League. So that covers, I think, the full slate of our recommendations. I think the vote is in January. Is that right?
Actually, I wasn't clear on whether we voted today and then we passed the gavel in January, or.
Yeah, I was under the assumption that we would vote today. So I don't know if I got that wrong, but so that in January the slate would be.
That's what I thought too.
Yeah, I think the vote would be today. So, is there any question on that? Or?
Any questions for Mike Lyons or discussion about the nominations or any nominations from the floor?
I have just one question. Just listening down this, what were the criteria that you used in terms of thinking about a balance in the board and so forth?
Well, of course, part of our goal is to have some diversity. And there's also the regional representation. And also in the position of chair, it's someone who has the both the capacity of time and the qualities to serve in that position. We felt at this point Grace would be an appropriate choice for the chair position. I think you'll notice in the vice chair, when you include the chair and the vice chair positions, it includes representatives from all 4 of the MPOs. So they're all stepping up to some responsibility in those positions. That seems like a well-rounded.
I guess that was my question. So that was the design. I'm enthusiastic about every one of those individuals, but it certainly does skew towards being an MPO-led organization, and that is, in fact, we're building that into strategy by doing so.
Yeah, I recognize that, and that wasn't something we were necessarily so conscious of, but as we looked for the individuals who have the trying to achieve some. You have Grace Gallucci and Rachel McCartney, so we have some gender diversity there. And it turned out that we had in the chair and vice chair positions representatives from each of the 4 MPOs. It wasn't, we didn't go in designing it that way, but that's how that one appeared. The treasurer position we have no choice on. The secretary position, Fred Wright, who is the director of the Akron Urban League. Our first choice, well, we had explored some other choices also, and from a different region, and that person wasn't able to do it, and Fred was our backup, so he agreed to do it. I don't have any other explanation at this point. I think we have fairly decent regional diversity, and I think we have a better both gender and group diversity than we did this year. So we have 3 years to try this. You know, this is and it is a little heavy on the MPO side, but I think a lot of the involvement and a lot of the responsibility for continuity rests on their shoulders. So I'm not sure that that's a bad thing. That's just...
Well, I actually think it can be a very good thing.
Yeah.
But it certainly elevates some expectations about the MPOs being able to come together and work at the end of this project.
Yes. So in that sense, I felt that it was a good direction to this makeup. Okay. Any other questions?
And Lucy, go ahead.
Additionally, on the executive committee is the Fund for Our Economic Future and the Regional Prosperity Initiative. You didn't mention them. And their representatives and their alternates.
Oh, yes. Fund for Economic Future, the principal representative is Brad Whitehead. And John Mitterholzer and Bethia Burke are serving as alternates for you.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Lyons, the list should therefore reflect that discussion?
Yes.
Okay. I will also point out that Rachel McCartney suggested that she would reach out to Ashtabula for a recommended alternate to Bill Davenport.
And the RPI principal representative is Mike Lyons, and the alternate is Tom Terrell.
Any further discussion, questions? I think before there's a motion, I might go ahead. I know we just kind of covered this, but read through the final slate just so it's clear for everybody. The proposed officers for next year would be Grace Galucci from NOACA as chair, Bob Now from Stark County Regional Planning as first vice chair, Jason Segedy, myself for second vice chair from AMATS, Rachel McCartney from Eastgate for third vice chair, Steve Hambley most likely as treasurer from NOACA, and Fred Wright from the Akron Urban League as secretary. And then for the those are the slate of actual officer positions from the Code of Regulations. And then for the executive committee members remaining that aren't included in the officers, Jeff Dutton from the SCATS region at large, John Getchy from Eastgate, Bill Davignon with an alternate to be determined, hopefully from Ashtabula County for the Eastgate region at large, Gene Nixon from Summit County Health with Donna Skoda backing him up as AMATS region at large, Freddie Collier from the city of Cleveland, and Shauna Doherty backing him up as the NOACA region at large, Joe Hadley from NEFCO, Connie Kraus would be his alternate, Brad Whitehead from the Fund for Economic Future with John Mitterholzer and Bethia Burke as his alternates, and the Regional Prosperity Initiative represented by Mike Lyons with Tom Tyrrell as an alternate. So sorry to belabor those again, but I just wanted to make it clear before we ask for a motion. So at this point, if there isn't any further discussion, I would entertain a motion to approve this slate of officers for 2013 with the passing of gavel at the first meeting next year.
I have a question.
Sure.
Just in regards to the names, I think at least two of them you aren't confirmed on the name of those individuals. So in general, everyone that you did name, they have accepted the nomination?
I believe that's correct, right,
That's
Mike?
my understanding.
Okay, and then the 2 or 3 that are not confirmed, as far as taking a motion, so you suggest, as determined by that particular organization? Like one organization, you said we don't have a choice, it's directly from that organization. So I guess assuming that the criteria we filled and the appropriate person would be nominated from them.
Right. For example, for the treasurer position, the Code of Regulations states it has to be a NOACA representative. I think NOACA wants to have Steve Hambley, but in the event he can't serve, they would have to provide someone else to represent them. And then for the others I mentioned, we actually do have an actual officer identified. It's the alternates that we don't have identified. So we do have every organization that needs to be represented by this slate, and we would just have to ratify who the alternates are at the next meeting.
So are we voting then on, I'm sorry, so question, are we voting on just the officers and not the alternates? And the alternates are appointed at some other time?
I think my understanding is we would be voting on the officers with the alternates we've identified, and then we might want to do a quick item in January to fill in the other alternates, just to close the circle.
There's only one alternate that was not listed, and that was a potential alternate from Ashtabula, so you could take that up in January.
Right.
Like leave it open, we're not voting on that today.
Right.
Right. Everyone we have identified we would vote on, and then we would fill in that gap at the January meeting. Good question.
Just a point of clarification for whoever's going to make the motion.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I would entertain a motion for the slate of officers. Don? Motion? Motion. Thanks. Second from Mr. Miller. Any further discussion? All in favor of the slate of officers as I previously read, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, the motion carries. Thank you.
Jason, could you add that clarification about the open?
I'm sorry?
That clarification. It includes the clarification
Oh, yes, yes. The clarification that there's some to be determined spots. And before we move on, I would like to...
Chairman, Kelly's pointed out, Don, are you the alternate?
I'm the alternate.
I think maybe the maker of the motion should probably be the member, just for clarification, if the member is willing.
I move.
We'll let the minutes reflect that.
Reflect technical correctness, Mr. Chairman.
And before we move on, since we are discussing officers, I wanted to take a second, hopefully I don't embarrass them, to recognize Dan Mamula, who's one of our outgoing vice chairs. And Dan's got some career opportunities ahead of him that will probably mean that he won't be serving on the board, but I understand he's interested in continuing to help with the project. And I just wanted to recognize him for really the great job that he's done this year as a vice chair. He's been a tremendous help to me as chair, and I think in everything that he's been involved with the organization. And Dan, I think I speak for the group in wishing you well for wherever your future takes you, and for the parts of your future that are still with us, wish you the best and look forward to working with you.
You're too kind. You're actually throwing me out. No, I appreciate those words, and I appreciated being on the board and the finance committee and the vice chair and the organizational redesign team and the wallpaper brigade, whatever else. But no, I enjoyed it, and as I said to the executive committee, I'll say to everyone here, I've met a lot of great people here. As a matter of fact, all of you are great people. And I learned a lot, and I hope I left a lot. And I appreciate what you're doing, and I will continue to tout the effort and stay involved as I can with the product development team as we move forward and as I have time to do so. So with that being said, carry on.
Thanks, Dan. Right, we're on item 4 now, organization. This gets into the financial reporting portion of the agenda, so I'll turn it over to the staff to present the current financials and discuss the status of the budget. I think first up is Sarah.
And just as in other meetings, you have the leverage match report in your packets. So we're at pretty much the same level as last meeting, just where we are in the reporting cycle, because we report on a quarterly basis. So the number will go up next month. Most everyone is reporting at this point. So if you have any questions, please flag me down after the meeting or get a hold of me. There are a couple of organizations that still have not submitted. And then the survey. We sent out a leverage match survey about a month and a half ago for you all to complete and send around your organizations with anyone that you think will be part of this effort in the coming year. And we did increase our responses to the survey, but we still have only had 20 out of 33 members, consortium members, respond to the survey. We had a couple of organizations outside of NEOSCC board members respond. So I would like for everyone to please go back to your offices today or tomorrow, fill out the survey. The link is still valid, and it's included elsewhere in your packet as well. Please forward that on to anyone else in your organization, because we are taking the results of this to really fill out how the products are going to be developed over the next year, and to find areas where we can assist Sasaki, the consultant, with some of the work that they are doing. That was one of the areas where we could save some money on the contract, is relying on the in-kind resources that you all pledged. So there's a little bit more detail in your packets on how people responded to a few of the questions. So we had a pretty wide range of work experiences and interests that people have. So that's very good for plugging into different products next year. All right, thank you.
Thanks. Any questions for Sarah before we move on? All right, the next item is Emma Barcelona discussing the month-end financial report.
So you have in your packets the two typical pieces of information, the first being the cash position report and the second being just where we are in the budget. With regard to the cash position report, the one item of note here is I did the request we made to Team NEO recently to reimburse for some expenses that spend the funds for our economic future. did post in November, so you'll see that as a receipted fund last month. And then with regard to the financial information, I just wanted to let you know that I added one column here that's actually the amount expended or posted in the month. So in this case, it was expended in November 2012, as well as refined the column C, which is the target program budget, to note the 35-month time horizon of our grant, not 36 months. So you'll see our progress there to date. Any questions I can answer with regard to the expenditures, the budget, or the cash position?
All right, thanks, Emma. And the next item really related to that financial report is a budget revision proposed by the staff, and I'll turn that over to Hunter and his folks to present. This is a resolution before our consideration.
Chairman, in everybody's packet is this chart with 3 tables on it. Because of our need to move forward on consultancy for scenario planning and fiscal impact, as well as to adjust to the realities of our expenditures, where we both over and under our original budget, we are going to be requesting a formal budget change from HUD with your concurrence. The top column, or the top table, is the current broad category budget. Broad categories, those elements on the left are the key components of what the federal government looks to for managing a wide range of these projects. These are the key elements. And this is the budget that is been approved and is currently on file with HUD, as well as a backup with a detailed line item budget. And it reflects $4.25 million in HUD amount, $500,000 in cash, and $1.4 million in projected match and leverage match, for a total budget of 6.247. What you see in the middle column is the revised broad category budget we are seeking your approval of today, so we can submit that to HUD, which adjusts our labor and benefits, as you note in the third table, by significant percentages, and shifts resources from other line items into the consultant line item, and also addresses the status of the Fund for Our Economic Future of cash funding, and where we stand currently with the leverage match amount that Sarah just reported on. The end total target budget is the same, the HUD money is the same. But this would then allow us to both reflect the match amounts that we've received, and equally importantly, to allocate sufficient funds in the consultant line items to do what we need to do to finish up our work. And again, at the bottom are the over-unders, so you get a sense of where the funding came from and where it's gone to. So we're going to be requesting the budget revision listed in the middle, budget through 12/31/13, which again reflects Emma's report on the 35-month budget total.
And there is a resolution before us, 2012-19, approving the revised program budget as Hunter reported, which would be the budget shown in the middle table on the attachment that he referred to. Before we take a vote, are there any questions or clarifications that you would like to have on the budget that Hunter could provide? Great.
I just would like to state that the Finance Committee did approve this and being forwarded to the full board.
Yes, very
much. Anticipate next year, oftentimes we budget and we anticipate other changes we know are coming, or is this just staff?
Well, as Emma noted, the budget period for the federal grant runs to 12/31/13, and so given the funding we have in hand at this point in time, and the this, again, is a budget revision that is being presented, will be presented with documentation of how. This shows how their funding and the required local match is going to be extended within the time period of that grant.
Any further questions? All right, if not, I will go ahead and entertain a motion for approval of Resolution 2012-19. Moved by Mr. Garchar, second by Mr. Manuel. Any further discussion? All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, the motion carries. Next item on the agenda is the open and pending contract update. I'll turn it back over to the staff.
Alan, do you want to report on this?
Yeah, just quickly, this is the memo just updated currently based on the current status of our major agreements and contract, as well as some that are completed. The biggest effort here, though, is the one that Hunter will be speaking to with regard to Sasaki. But on the open and pendings, is there anything I can answer to clarify? Okay.
No, as Hunter goes up there, the next item is regional planning, scenario planning, fiscal impact consultant. Hunter's going to give a presentation on this to give you some more information on what this item entails. And then this one, too, would culminate in Resolution 2012-20 to authorize us to enter into a contract with Sasaki Associates.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. As you noted, there's a resolution, the 2012-20, that would authorize us to enter into a contract with Sasaki Associates. As a result of the meeting, the Finance Committee meeting, there's going to be, we're asking you to pass on another resolution that was introduced at that time dealing with the remaining terms of the engagement consultancy with Cobalt. And I'll ask, at the appropriate time, I'll ask the chair of that committee to explain what that resolution is about. But let's start by, again, reviewing some of this we went over at the last meeting, which pursuant to the authorization for us to proceed into discussion with Sasaki. And not to belabor it, but again, what we are dealing with is essentially the elements in yellow on this side of the organization chart, the planning management consultancy, scenario planning and fiscal impact, and the related contracts which we already have with Western Economic Services for the assessment of impediments to fair housing choice, and regional engagement with the Cobalt Group, which were anticipated in the reorganization to fall within the purview of the planning management consultant. And the work that we're contracting with Sasaki to do, if you approve the resolution, would be for the planning management consultancy, scenario planning, and fiscal, and to structure the Cobalt and West consultancies within that framework. The Sasaki Associates team, listed team, includes City Architecture of Cleveland, Ferganese Associates of Portland, and Nelson Nygaard of New York. As you know, as we talked about last time, we bring to this, they bring to this table both significant local expertise and national expertise in the areas that we're contracting for. And again, the related consultancies, which we've already contracted for. And we fully expect that the work of our strategies in communications and engagement will be closely aligned with this effort. As we talked last time, the rationale of the selection committee determined won the choice for Sasaki were the following. It was an integrated approach to all tasks. It was the only firm that was selected that had submitted on all three tasks, that was selected for all three tasks. They have experience working on sustainable communities. Ferganese is one of the designated technical assistance firms in scenario planning. Sasaki is leading the effort in Des Moines, a very comparable effort in that community doing very similar work to our own. They have a proven ability to work at large, complex projects in this environment on tight timelines. Gateway and the Euclid Corridor were projects that many of us are familiar with, and several of us were involved in directly. And Sasaki was the lead on much of that work. There's a strong local presence and understanding of the region, particularly with the city architecture component. We saw them as the best overall combination of skills and experience with a strong project leadership history, as well as a set of company histories, and again, demonstrated scenario planning experience. One of the elements that's not on this is that the scenario planning methodology that was proposed by this team is an open source model, unlike some that are basically licensed, which will further our stated intent to build capacity in Northeast Ohio to do this sort of work. Scope of services, Sasaki will manage and or coordinate the work of consultants already engaged, as well as their own team. They'll perform the scenario planning and fiscal impact, and will create, along with our staff and with the in-kind staff that Sarah has been describing, will create the final vision, Vibrant Neo 2040 vision. We've been through a very systematic process of approvals, and I don't want to belabor this, but it has involved both committees, selection committees, and the executive committee and board in reviewing this, and we've had webinars to make sure that people who wish to participate in this have had ample opportunity. We had today the review of by the Technical Steering Committee and Finance Committee, and the recommendation for approval of that contract was achieved at that meeting, as well as the amendment, or the second resolution I referred to earlier. And today we are asking for the approval to enter into contract for an amount not to exceed $1.3 million for Sasaki and Associates. That will include the remaining public engagement process work previously approved but not specifically contracted for. The next steps will be a detailed scoping meeting in January, which will go engage all of the consultants in early January to come up with a detailed integrated work plan, a coordinated engagement schedule of activities, which will again bring together the engagement work that we've been undertaking, both for the planning work generally and for the assessment of impediments to fair housing, beginning mid-January to prepare for scenario planning. And we will produce a high-level schedule, which is laid out in general terms in the following graphics, which lays out several stages of the work plan, fiscal impact analysis, the development of scenario planning handbooks, the development of the alternative scenarios, and analysis, and selection of preferred scenario, and the final report by October, which again gives us sufficient time to close out this phase of the grant work in accordance with the HUD requirements. So this is the broad outline. What we're asking for are two resolutions. I'm going to ask Grace Gallucci to describe the first one, which is not listed on your agenda because it came out of the Finance Committee discussions.
Can I ask someone to actually read the resolution that we drafted? Read the title.
So the new 2012-20 will be the following, and then there'll be a new resolution 21, which is the Sasaki agreement, just the note there. So we're just making the language sure, making sure.
And as they're looking for the exact language, basically what was already in your agenda was the authorization to approve the contract with Sasaki. However, part of that contract with Sasaki includes a portion of it that is engagement. So the contract with Sasaki is $1.12 1.25 initially, that was our amount. We then add the engagement, and that makes it a $1.3 million contract. But we currently have another contract with a firm for engagement, and that's Cobalt. And the board authorized that contract only as far as phase 1. So there was a certain dollar amount and a length of time through January 31st of next year. That was authorized by the board and will stay in place. But phase 2 and phase 3 will be really performed as part of the Sasaki contract. And so these actions that came out of the Finance Committee meeting reflect that. So in order to be able to approve the Sasaki contract for $1.3 million, we need to approve a resolution that in essence cancels that engagement contract phase 2 and 3, which the board had not authorized. So it only authorized 1. It keeps us continuing 1, but then cancels 2 and 3, as 2 and 3 will be rolled up into the Sasaki. So that's the explanation of it, the actual language.
So the language here is that the Board of Directors of NEOSCC, that the services agreement with Cobalt Group is terminated for convenience upon completion of the first performance period, our first phase, no later than January 30th, 2013, and to not proceed with subsequent phases.
And the idea here, too, is that we selected Cobalt through a procurement process. They were deemed to be the best contractor. They've done their work. We're very pleased with their work in that first phase, and we would like and hope that the intent would be that they would be engaged as part of the broad Sasaki contract. Yes.
Corey.
Like in hopes that Sasaki will subcontract Cobalt to finish 2 and 3 phases, phases 2 and 3?
Yes, except that it may not look exactly like phase 2 and 3 because the dollar amounts were not exactly the same. But the idea would be that the functions that were to be performed as part of 2 and 3 would now be rolled up as part of Sasaki, yes, as a subcontractor. And then considering that I believe one of the reasons that the PMO office wanted to undertake this sort of merging of the functions is to derive some efficiencies and economies of scale. So achieving 2 and 3, but for less of an overall budget or less of an overall expense to NEOSC.
And I believe also Hunter could probably expound on this a little bit in more detail, but I believe also an idea that Sasaki would be serving a project manager role and that the engagement would be pretty intimately connected with scenario planning and some of the other planning work. So I think it made sense to the PMO also to have that consultant managing other aspects of the project, including engagement.
Yes, the engagement work that needs to be performed, which Cobalt has been teeing up with the various endeavors, is intimately connected to the performance of the scenario planning. It's a civic engagement process. So it's really very critical that those two pieces of work are hand in glove. The other aspect that has emerged over the last couple of months is the assessment of impediments to fair housing choice, which also has an engagement process. And by taking this route, we can consolidate and rationalize and simplify that engagement. So we're not going out to the same people 2 or 3 times. We are much clearer about what we're engaging, for whom, for what purpose, and when. And frankly, not get into a sort of engagement burnout on any front. But again, the expectation that the board placed on the PMO and been placing on the consultant is that there be strong project management of the planning process, and that's how we are coming back to you saying, given where we are in the contracting, given where we are in the project, this is our best, our recommendation for best course of action.
Not to belabor, but in regards to Sasaki and the impact or the engagement portion of the contract being blended into what they're going to do, Is it the intent, or are they able to do the engagement themselves, or ultimately they are going to subcontract it out?
We believe that what was presented to them was that we have an engagement component right now. I think if we had perhaps done the timing somewhat differently, that would all be woven into one contract. But this is the best way, we think, that gets the engagement work that's been underway for some time folded in, and we can get off to the races.
I don't think that answered the question, at least as I heard it. Sasaki did not propose, or did they propose, or do they have the intent to do their work themselves as a firm without subcontracting, or their intent is to subcontract?
My belief is their intent is to subcontract. Their intent is to work with, their intent, as we understand it, is to work with the team we have in place, rather than bring somebody else in new. But again, we can't dictate that.
Right.
But we can clearly indicate that we've been satisfied with the work today. Does that answer the question?
Yes, and may I ask one more, please?
Sure.
If because they would have the discretion of who they would select to perform that part of the work if they're not doing it in-house. If Cobalt is not the selected contractor or subcontractor, will we be able to use the information that we have gathered through Cobalt to continue on with phases 2 and 3?
We expect that the work being done in phase 1 will be complete and be our work product, yes. If it comes to that.
And I think one more thing to add on the history of the Cobalt contract originally, I'm not going to be conversant on the dollar amounts, but the original amount was fairly large, and also I think the scope of engagement was kind of unclear. I think we did this over the summer. So that was, well, we didn't necessarily foresee Sasaki coming on board. It was the intent of the board at that time that we knew, the future was a little bit murky with engagement, and the board was a lot more comfortable with approving just one phase and a lesser amount. So I think our previous actions do reflect well on, the intentionality that was there and culminated in this particular request from the Finance Committee to make this motion and this new resolution. Before we move on, does anyone, I think the best way to proceed forward is to start with the resolution that Emma had just read, reflecting the details of what Grace had reported out on severing the contract with Cobalt. That would be the gist of the first resolution. Are there further questions or discussion on that before we move on?
So that would be renumbered resolution 2012-20. Is that correct, Emma?
Just for clarity, Jason, we are severing or not renewing?
Actually, there was particular wording in your motion, Emma?
It was termination for convenience?
For termination for convenience, that's the phrase.
Consistent with the terms of the contract.
And I think that was consistent with our legal counsel.
And we had that discussion in the Finance Committee meeting, and really what we're doing is not executing phase 2 and 3. But from a legal perspective, our attorney has advised us that that was the language that needed to happen in order to not advance 2 and 3.
Okay.
I move that we terminate that agreement, the Cobalt agreement, as set forth in that explanation.
The motion from Mr. Lyons. Second, Ms. Brenda. Any further discussion, questions before we vote? If not, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries, and then I think that takes us to what was previously Resolution 2012-20, which is now Resolution 2012-21, which is actually authorization for the Project Management Office to enter into a contract with Sasaki for an amount not to exceed $1.3 million.
I move that we approve that agreement.
Got a motion.
Second.
Second, Mr. Head. Mr. Whitehead.
So it may be clear to all the planners in the room, but it's less clear to me. Can you describe to me what are the components of a scenario plan? And then what does the product actually look like? And then what are they committing to in terms of the communications of that product? So what are the components? What does it actually look like? And then third is, what are the commitments in terms of communication?
The basic, as we've discussed in prior meetings, the basic components of a scenario plan are to look at the existing conditions, the businesses as usual scenario is often known as, and extend that out for a planning period to determine what the impacts will be on the areas of concern. In some places where you've got large growth, for instance, we're going to need to accommodate another 1 million people. We have our existing zoning. What will it look like if we make no changes? Then working through a process of civic engagement, which starts with values, community values, by drawing through a set of meetings across a region or a planning area to identify what's important in people's minds as we look at evaluating both the business as usual scenario and other scenarios that come out of the meetings that are generated by the meetings, also generated by staff. The net out of that is to look at a wide range of alternatives, which may test different components. Again, in an area where let's say you have a large population growth in sensitive lands, what are the effects of low density zoning on the desert of Phoenix? But what happens if we have a higher density zoning? What effect does that have on your land area, on your water quality, air quality? So you're going to test the scenarios over a fairly extended period of time, 20, 30, 40 years, against a set of issues or concerns that are of value. And from those come a preferred scenario, again through a process of consultation, engagement, and elimination. What's the preferred scenario? Now, what we specified in this process is that it's not just a wish list scenario, but a fiscally constrained, or looking at the fiscal impact of the business as usual and what the other preferred scenarios are, so that you can understand the broad cost of doing business in different ways, and ideally make decisions that way. This involves also the use of crowdsourcing and alternative and social media to broaden the process beyond just sitting in meetings. But it's an interactive process that is frankly the process that has emerged in HUD's advice to all of the grant recipients is a preferred way to proceed to look at the future. Again, we've added into this a strong emphasis on the physical impacts and not just on the pretty pictures. And an understanding of what that means in an area which historically, at least for the last 40 years, has experienced limited growth in population and employment. So I can't tell you how it's going to come out, because that would be prejudging the solution. I can say that what will come out of this will be a set of analyses looking at business as usual or current trends and alternatives. And as Joe Hadley has pointed out some years ago, NEFCO did this by hand for its area. It provides policy guidance. Now, the hope and expectation is that the constituents around this table will both participate in this and use it. And that's one of the reasons that the Technical Steering Committee was set up, because frankly, you've got 4 metropolitan planning organizations and 2 councils of governments who deal with transportation, air, and water quality. You also have other agencies of public housing, public health, and our entitlement communities, all of which need to have an opportunity to look at what are the futures. Out of this comes a report, probably a fairly typical report that comes out of any planning process, but more importantly, we think is the capacity to plan. Not to get academic on you, but sort of reminded of Dwight Eisenhower's comment that plans aren't important, planning is. Part of what we're doing here, Brad, is to develop the capacity to work across this region on issues that are region-wide. We started with the map, the baseline maps of land use and zoning. We're already having this discussion around the basic population and economics projections. We want to get the REC's ideas into this mix as one of the key alternatives for doing something different. But out of this comes both a plan, which should be suitable for bodies like NEOSCC to adopt as a framework and use in their long-term planning, or for bodies like NEOSCC to use as a framework for their proposed strategic plan, but also a process by which we've come together across the region, both at a civic level and at an institutional level, to plan together.
So thank you for that. I guess hopefully one very quick question. So will their recommendations be filtered through either us or some section of us, or will their recommendations stand on their own?
Well,
or their findings stand on their own?
We have been working through with Cobalt on the Citizens Advisory Council construct, which came out of our communications and engagement planning process that Mike Lyons and Fred Wright have chaired. The expectation is that there will be a process that involves the citizens. We already have in the MPO citizens involvement committees, getting those put together as well. But it comes through, this body has got to, by the rules of the game that we laid out when we started this, has got to adopt this by a supermajority. So yes, it will.
Well, no, it has to adopt recommendations, but I guess what I'm mindful of is I would like to see the report come forward as the report and let the public have at that, rather than the report be filtered through a political process, and then something else is seen by the public that then we choose to adopt or not adopt.
Well, if I may, this is a public process. The scenario plans and the alternate scenarios will all be public.
Okay, so I guess then what we're committing to is that the report that they may produce will come to this body, which, as you say, is a public meeting, unfiltered.
It'll come from the preferred scenario as selected by the engagement process with the public. There will be a preferred scenario will be arise from the engagement. And that would be the scenario that then the policies and everything else that would need to make that preferred scenario for 2040 a reality would then be what is before this body.
Brad, one question I was going to ask Hunter, and you, I think, helped me think about fleshing it out a little bit more, and I think it speaks to part of what you're talking about. Is I do think it would be good if we got information from NEOSCC on a rolling basis and we're able to both roll it out externally, as Brad's talking about, as well as look at it internally. And that is a pretty ambitious timeline. And what I'd meant to ask you before, Hunter, if you could talk just a little bit about, that's a pretty detailed timeline. What our best guess, and it kind of shows it at the starting date of NEOSCC is, and then more importantly, what you see as the board's role in both, I think, embedded within that outreach to the public. I guess what I'm getting at is what, when and how do you see and what do you see kind of coming back both to us and to external stakeholders? I know that's a long question and a long process.
Some of that will come out of the detailed work program. The work program starts with the interagency or the team, both the consultant team and the management team, meetings in early January to come forward with a detailed report. We are going to need to decide and define those interactions in greater detail with the board as well. Now, we're meeting monthly through this period of time, and we will be making monthly reports, obviously. And we are encouraging deep participation by board members in this work. But I will come back to you with the specifics on when these specific decision nodes are for you to take action.
Will there be opportunities to engage the board in helping to put together the scenarios?
Yes. I mean, I think part of why we've done the onboarding with the board, with the MPOs and COGS, have talked about what scenario planning is all about. is to get your engagement and the engagement of your board members and the engagement of your public, and to continue to grow them so that you're participating at the table and are not an audience. And I think each one of you has really worked to try to bring that about, given that it's sometimes a little hard to sell something that is hard to explain to folks until they really get it.
Go ahead.
Hunter, you talk about a lot of this is intended to build capacity in the region overall. But at the end of the process, the consortium has certain products that we have to deliver. Can you give a sense of what, or flavor of how much this represents the final products? I mean, there are a number of products, but how big of a piece is what they're doing in terms of those final products?
This is a very significant part of the product. I mean, we've talked about the plan and the products. The products that we look for: dashboard, toolkit, policies, and prototypes. Some of those come to some degree out of the planning process, like policy recommendations don't come out of thin air. They will come out of this discussion of what we need to put in place to get where we want to go. But others, like the toolkit, will be more definitive. I will say this, that when we talk to the folks at HUD who put the major grant in place, what they're looking for is a framework plan for the region which brings together the different planning processes and actors. And is something that it can be and will be adopted and be used to frame up future investments. In most cases, they're working through metropolitan planning organizations, but they're looking for the map, the policies. Where are you headed? In a broad framework sense, not down to the details, not down to what happens on your parcel, but what direction are you headed as a region? And bring together not just the transportation side, but the housing side, the environmental side, the community side, the broad discussion. That's essentially what the principle. Am I getting it correct, Lucy?
Yes.
That's what the grant tour is looking for in a phase 1 or category 1 grant. This will also tee us up to go after the second phase of grant work, which some agencies have received already, which is implementation, which really can take some of these things like the tools to another level.
I would like to suggest to the staff and to the incoming chair that we add an item as a standing report at all of our board meetings next year, just to report out on kind of where we are in the process with SASAKI, and maybe use that item as a conduit to get input from the board, which I imagine would be done anyway, but I think it would reflect some of the concerns.
Well, I think that's a very important point, that the board needs to be, and again, some of the other standing organizations, like our metropolitan planning organizations, we're hoping as time goes on with RPI as well, have had us make presentations so that this is nothing strange. But I would hope that our new agenda focus, which puts emphasis on having time to discuss, the clock will be made available to keep this on track. And George, your engagement.
Sorry. George, I think I saw your... Yes, on a sort of another track. At last month's meeting, Hunter, you had indicated that Sasaki's original cost proposal was higher than what we were able to pay, and that would, part of the negotiations process would be to get that amount down. Could you just, in very broad terms, describe the adjustments that were made, and more importantly, indicate what, if any, impact that will have on the proposed work strategy?
Well, the adjustments that were made to take down from the original proposal to what we have in front of you now involved taking out elements that we didn't believe were necessary. So there was something called an early win project, which they used in a number of settings coming in from scratch, and we said we've already been doing a fair amount of that. It involved also how we utilize our in-kind resources, meeting facilitation, engagement in the scenario planning process. That's why Sarah's work determining who is available for what tasks are important, because to meet our budget targets, we're going to have to do a certain amount of self-help here. It also involved being very rigorous about the engagement, so that we are not engaging through Sasaki and engaging through Cobalt and engaging in the me how can we bring those together to be very efficient. And frankly, it involves an engaged board that's able to make decisions. Because one of the things that adds time and budget to any consulting contract is, how can I get an answer? So we are committed to providing you with the information that allows you to make the decisions in timely so we get back to them to move on to the next phase. You have every reason to expect that the calendar we bring forward will have decision points for you and the committees to give feedback so the project can move forward. And we're all familiar with projects that's going to stall out because the client hasn't really been able to think this through. That's why we spent time in engagement internally and all the work that Sally Parker and her team have been doing to basically enable this body to make decisions.
Thank you. Any further questions, discussion? John.
On the fiscal impact that's going to come out of the scenario planning, how fine a level are we going to get to? I mean, is it at a 12-county region level? I mean, that's not going to be very useful for us. At a county level would be helpful for me, but not necessarily for me or Brenda. And then even if we got to, say, the city size of Elyria, where that would handle, it may not necessarily influence or be helpful to a lot of the smaller cities in my townships where, quite frankly, a lot of decisions may have to happen because that's where a lot of change is happening at. And if the fiscal impact isn't getting down to those levels, I'm not sure how much use it will be. And that's the one thing I've really been focused on the entire time here, is having that fiscal impact analysis to help inform our policy makers.
Right. I think what we will get is a fairly broad fiscal impact assessment, not down to the individual street and decision making. One of the choices that was made, as you know, during the selection process is not to get as detailed as I think we'd all like in our communities, but to stay at the county and metro level. As Grace Galuccia said, we want to drive that to the individual county level as well as to the MPO level. That's the expectation at this point, but I think that's a very important question to have further detail, which we will.
I just want to make sure I understand where we landed, because I think if the consultant does their job, there's going to be a big dose of reality pie that's going to be served up here. And the question is, especially for those of you who are in elected positions and so forth, what do you want this to represent? Is this a facilitated process where their product is our product, or is this a facilitated process where they deliver a product as they see it, and then which you all in your duties and responsibilities, and all of us, determine what is politically feasible? And I think we were confused on that when it was the grants and the initial conditions report, where I think some of us came in and said, let's give the straight reality, call it like it is, and so forth. And a lot of people were saying, wait a second, you have to understand the forces that are operating on us here. And we were, I think, circumspect about how aggressively we laid out some of the situation. And as long as we're clear on which one it is, I just don't want us to be caught in between. I think it's helpful to have a group like this fly some cover. But I could understand if people say, no, time is short, we got a year, let's see if we can come up with a facilitated process, and this consultant is actually facilitating us.
I think it's a great question, and I think this is the most significant investment in this project. Basically, this is a quarter of our budget or more, and I think that for my part at least, I would like to see them essentially, as much as possible, give us the straight dope on what's going on in the region, and give some scenarios that we can basically do what you said and take a look at, see what's feasible. But I think it is very parallel to the discussion that we had on the conditions and trends, as you said, how much, and I know we got into how much are these conditions data-based and so forth. And I think data would be a key component of what this consultant would be bringing. But for my part, I would like to see them be able to be a little bit more of a unbiased third party that would come in and help us.
One of the things, Brad, that we asked the consultant team, we asked them all, whether this model could handle zero or negative growth. And we were sure that it can. That's the fundamental underlying issue that distinguishes our communities from a lot of the other places. We have no net new growth projection. And what we're trying to do, what we're suggesting, we talked to the technical steering committee, is tying this work back to the long-range projections that come out of the Department of Development and Population, the Department of Jobs and Family Services or Economics, which are at best very modestly optimistic over a very long period of time. It is also the information that each one of the MPOs are using for their travel forecasts. So essentially, it should be able to allow Grace Gallucci to look at alternatives to business as usual for her area using the same input data. Where if we can get something more optimistic that comes out of the REC study, that would be fine. But we basically said to Sasaki, we don't want to invest in a lot of extra projections that wind up being pie in the sky and unbelievable. But this is a somber, sober moment to reflect on the future. That is underlying a lot of this, and hopefully, because we also know that people care about this area, open up new ways of thinking about the future that are trend-setting and optimistic. We need to start with the reality on the ground.
I think it's important to ensure that this process stays true to the people. I mean, when we say a facilitated process, we should only be facilitating the process in order to be able to engage people to tell us what they really think. And the objective would be to get the information from our constituents so we can look at that. Certainly, as policymakers, we can frame what we're doing based on that information. But that information has to be, without a doubt, true. I mean, we can't even have any kind of appearance that we're even remotely thinking of pushing a particular endpoint. I mean, it has to be. It has to be pretty clear that whatever people tell us is going to be delivered as information.
You have to also be open to the broad perspectives in the region, depending on if you know where you stand depends on sort of where you live sometimes.
I mean, I don't know exactly what's in the scope of this contract, and if it's not here, maybe it's at some point in the future. What I'd like to see also is whatever comes out of this in terms of the scenarios and the preferred scenario, I would assume we would have an evaluation of that by the third-party objective consultants to tell us the advantages and disadvantages, the pros, the cons, the realistic aspects, the unrealistic aspects, the challenges, the opportunities. I mean, to really help us determine what we can do and if we can do it incrementally or how to integrate it into our recommendations and our policies at the local level. So I'm hoping that we're going to get this information, then we're going to get an evaluation of that information.
Yes, embedded in this is a set of indicators which reflect a broad sense of the community's values. What are you trying to maximize? What are you trying to minimize? That you can look at the different options as to, in terms of the projected outcomes, whether they advance or deter what you want, what the community wants, what people want.
Mayor Bruni.
Just trying to operationalize all this. Is the contract such that we've done a lot of work in terms of identifying existing conditions. We've got to, you know, it's good work. But we also know that there are characteristics of healthy regions as well. And I guess what I'm looking for is, you know, as a mayor, I think to myself, where do we fit in all this? You know, that's what I'm asking is, where does Elyria fit? Where's our niche? And how can we become part of something larger than ourselves, because alone we can't make a difference? So, you know, is this contract going to allow us to compare our existing conditions to characteristics of healthy regions, identify those gaps, and then get the input that would allow us to develop preferred scenarios around that informed analysis? Because it's almost like it's got to be a larger market analysis of the region, where you look at, you compare our existing conditions to what we know a healthy region looks like, and what do we have and what do we don't have, how do we need to fill in the holes. And as we ask for input from people, I know from doing this type of planning work in communities that if you just go out and share information and say, what do you think, you're not going to get, I agree it needs to be true and it needs to be free, but it needs to be framed in an informed way so you get good information back. And there's got to be an education process, and there's got to be an analysis process, and there's got to be really a market analysis against what works and what we have and where we're going. And I guess to help me better understand that piece of it, could you speak to that a little bit? Because
well, I think, first of all, I'd like to get some of those detailed questions are ones that we need to pose to the consultant in terms of those products. I think what the net out of this, what to me, is to answer your broad question: where does Elyria fit? The firms that we are proposing to contract with bring with them national experience looking at and working in communities like ours. So yes, you'll get comparative information as to what fits. But a lot of the definition of what's healthy, what people want, a lot of that comes out of talking with the folks themselves in terms of where people's values are. And that gets embedded into this at the very beginning of this process. And it's used to test it against. But there are also other metrics and measures that can be brought into bear from our team to give you some indicators of what's appropriate, what's not, what's healthy, what's not.
because we know nationally there's bodies of research that at least speak to, you know, what are the healthy characteristics of the region. And while they don't exactly fit and overlay our region, there probably are some key elements. So I guess that's
So couldn't we have that as one of the scenarios? I mean, we could take our existing region and look at what an ideal is based on best practices or, you know, some standards. And that could, I mean, because we're going through a number of scenarios. So that could be one of them, and we could find a body of people to talk to that would able to inform us on that, and then that could do exactly what Mayor Brenda would like, to sort of say, here's where we are, here's where we would be if we chose what is discussed or perceived or proven at a best practices or national level, this is what we would like to see, what does it take to get there? So if we commit to that, then I think that...
Yeah, I think that's and you hit on the key point. It comes through looking at a scenario. They're not one or two, they're about 40 or 50 that will be looked at. Sarah?
I think just to add on to Hunter's point there, the first kind of go at the engagement process is starting to get at those values. That's what Sasaki will do. They'll take that back, figure out, as Hunter said, many different scenarios of, you know, maybe you want to focus on one that's a very compact development, or one that's emphasizing linkages to green space as a scenario, as kind of the theme for it. They'll develop some of those, come back to this body, test them out before they bring them out to the public, and that's how you get to your alternative scenarios that are tested. They'll take that, you come back with your preferred vision, that'll get tested again out with the public and with other stakeholders to make sure they got it right. And that's kind of the vetting process of how we get there. But that's where you do get some of the comparison to healthy areas, or you have the literature and the research that shows you this is what areas that are advanced in these sectors are doing, and this is basically what's the cost, what are the trade-offs to get to that point, and that's how the scenario planning process will work.
I would like to suggest, in the interest of time, that we move to a vote on this item, but I think it's clear to me just from participating in and observing the discussion, there's no shortage of interest on the scope of work with this consultant. I think it does point to, Hunter, maybe not only including, which I'm sure you were going to do anyway, a standing item at board meetings, but maybe making sure that we have some conduits for engaging the board outside of these meetings. That could be both separate meetings and web-based and things like that, to be sure that we get a wide range of input on the scope. And I think the good thing right now is that we're in a pretty good position to do that. Nothing's been decided yet. So with that, I would like to entertain, I guess we have a motion and a second on the floor. I almost forgot about that. If there's no further discussion, all in favor of approving the contract with NEOSCC, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries, and I would like to suggest also that because we did have facilitated discussion, that we were going to talk about some of the themes from the engagement workshops, and I know we were planning on engaging some of the folks that are guests here today in those discussions, that we perhaps move that item up on the agenda in the interest of time. I was suggesting basically that we move item 6 up on the agenda so we could get to the facilitated discussion, since I think...
Yes, I think that, and Jeff and I were just talking, many of these reports, including the year-end update, we can do it in January.
Yeah, I think...
meeting, which would be good. You do have your January list for you. So why don't we have that discussion? Jeffrey?
And how much time?
We had said the meeting would go to 3:30 and the reception would start at 3:30, so if everyone's good with that, I'd like to keep it that way.
Okay, who isn't good with that? Raise your hand.
If not,
And I apologize for this time if I am not projecting my voice. I have a bit of a bronchitis issue going on, but it's a little hard to breathe and speak. What we were... Sorry, don't look at these videos.
Jeffrey.
it'll get there eventually.
Oh, they're in your packet anyway. So what we thought we would do to conclude the year end, as we are trying to finish teeing up the scenario process, and this is actually from our perspective on the agenda, a better segue to what we're going to be talking about. And as I've looked around the room, there are the majority of you have been engaged in a lot of conversations, either with us one-on-one or in small groups or at the NPR workshops. And what we wanted just to do is sort of step in and give you an update on some of those themes that are emerging, which I think to Brad and everybody else who asked a question about how does this scenario process actually come together and address issues that will unite the region in a more common, vibrant vision for the 12 counties that we're talking about. And as we've been going through the last 6 months, we've been focused on teeing up a variety of components for the scenario planning. So it hasn't just been, let's go talk to people to hear what they have to say. It really has been, do you know who NEOSCC is? Do you know what scenario planning is? Have you looked at the Conditions and Trends platform? And are there things that you understand or need to know more about? So it's been a very diverse conversation. And just to quickly go through what we have accomplished so far,
It includes a lot of integrated project management that I think Hunter alluded to when he talked about sort of trying to fit the consultants under one umbrella. It makes a lot of sense in terms of making sure that there is an intentional set of activities that happen on a very tight time frame. There has also been a lot of talk around metrics and what metrics for scenario planning and engagement might mean in 2013. Those metrics have to do with both teeing up the educational part as well as teeing up the actual engagement activities and who do we really want to talk to. And I'll get to that in a minute because as you'll see in some of the themes that have come out of our preliminary conversations, it's not just the people who've been in the room planning this process for the last 18 months. There are a lot of other perspectives that many of you had questions about, particularly when we talk about education. What is its role in regional planning? We also spent time working with the MPO and the COG members and their board members. We will be reaching out to those folks again at the beginning of the year, partially in tandem with Sarah and the leverage resource opportunities, but also to reach people who might not have been able to engage so far. And the reason that engagement is important is the board membership of the MPOs and COGs really reaches several different audiences at once. And by their mere engagement in those municipal planning activities, they're engaged and have a reason to be at the table. So it's a way for us, again, to build a stronger network with folks who are already familiar with regional planning information and are not necessarily coming to the table new and for the first time. We've held larger workshops in Cleveland, Summit County, Ashtabula, Mahoney County, and have had preliminary planning for workshops in 2013. Some lessons learned that we all might want to take into account as we go forward and do these kinds of exercises again. A presidential campaign year is not a good year or not a good time to get a hold of people, particularly in terms of engagement when people are being pummeled daily, almost hourly sometimes, depending upon where you lived in the region with information and communication. So that was one of the things that sort of hindered us from being able to hold meetings for the rest of the year, which is why many of them are going into next year. We had a second round of young leader events and follow-up focus groups to engage that group further, and I'll get to findings and some themes about their work in a minute. We have continued the network of networks development. So as we started out in June and July with about 600 people engaged in some form or fashion across the 12 counties, that number of really engaged people is well over 1,000 now. And that's really going to be the core group of people from which we spring into engagement action. And those folks are leaders. They're designed to help us penetrate and get to parts of the community that those of us here don't necessarily have a relationship with. Or if we do, how do we help connect them to meaningful ways to get engaged in 2013 activities? We've spent a lot of time reaching out to intermediaries and professional organizations and diversity networks across the region so that as we're doing this, we're not trying to hit 10 people when we could hit one person and get to those other 9. So the First Ring Suburbs Consortium in Cuyahoga County, the Jumpstart Diversity and Inclusion Network that goes across 19 counties or 16 counties. We've talked with township trustees and clerk organizations who are typically connected because of their professional responsibilities, but those networks transcend county and other jurisdictional boundaries. So it's given us a different perspective on what those kinds of organizations think about regional planning and working across jurisdictions. We have developed a draft concept for the Citizen Review Committee, which as we continue to refine it, is bringing 2 really important things to the table. One is to get to some of the questions that you had just recently asked about how do we educate people, and to Mayor Brinda's point, how do we tee the conversation up so that people know what they're actually being asked to respond to. And you cannot do that without an education process. And so while we had been researching a lot of different ways of doing this, we believe that we've come up with a model that we can adapt for use in the region and that can support re-energizing the citizen advisory committees of the MPOs, as well as bring into that process some new and fresh life in terms of diversity of demographics, age, interests, and geography. We have taken an inventory of potential scenario planning sites and technology audits of those organizations. One of the things that we knew as we were looking broadly to plan across the region, and as Joe McDonald and Kelly Britt started researching the scenario planning earlier this year, that for it to be successful, it can't be all about the bells and the whistles and technology. It has to be about the quality of the conversation and the data and the engagement of people working on a scenario planning exercise depending upon where you are. And so what we had recommended early was that we try to leverage our current partners as well as look to other partners around the region who are already turnkey operations for workshops, planning, and technology applications. We know that in the education process, we're going to need to get sophisticated with regards to, if I need a subject matter expert on this topic, and I have 5 workshops going on over the same weekend, how do I get that subject matter expert's information out in an equitable way so that everybody across the region is being able to respond to the same information in a timely manner. In addition to looking at general engagement for scenario planning, we've been working with Anthony Kovac on how we dovetail the AI engagement, because as Hunter referenced earlier, the last thing you want to do is have scenario planning happening and then AI housing workshops happening, and then something else that's related to what we're doing, and not being able to convey to everybody in this room what we're doing and how we're doing it. So making sure that everything is dovetailed and organized, and that the information that's coming out of the housing workshops can come out of those in a way that can be fed into scenario planning. The theming of engagement data, which I'm going to get to in a minute, and we've also been participating, which is why Sally's here today, in trying to figure out what the board has been doing to develop capacity over the last year, and how you develop the capacity to be ambassadors and good messengers for what we're doing. How does that fit into what the staff has been doing and what an additional team of consultants will be bringing to the process? And lastly, there has been a lot of attention being paid to the new Vibrant Neo website. And so we've spent time showing it to people, making sure they know how to get on it, that there are places where they can go to get information, and really beginning to get people familiar with what we're doing, how we're doing it, and how all of this has teed up what we're doing in 2013. That is just sort of a short list of things. Does anybody have any specific questions? So as we have talked to people, either one-on-one individually through a key leader interview, as we've been trying to link networks of people together, as we've been at the county level meetings or the MPO workshops, what we have done for you today is try to summarize the major themes that has come out of that process. And the reason we wanted to do that was twofold. One is, earlier this year, I think I may have commented, and you probably hear me say it a lot when I keep talking about trying to develop a common language. One of the things that we sort of anticipated happening going into this engagement process was that people were going to say the word sustainability, and if you had 5 people in the room, it might mean 5 things, 5 different things to those 5 people. And so the thing that was encouraging about the data that we got back initially was that we had a lot of common themes, we just have a lot of different perspectives on how those themes fit into scenario planning. So what I'd like to do real quickly is walk through these themes and just give you some different thoughts that came out of the conversation so that you can understand how broadly people are defining what we're about to do. So in general, these were the 5 themes that came out, partially because of the way the agendas for the workshops were structured. We spent time talking about the Conditions and Trends platform. We spent a lot of time talking about collaboration and coordination and regionalism. And then towards the end of this year, we started talking about what can we anticipate from scenario planning. And in general, I would say that, while this is, I don't think, news to us, getting the NEOSCC mission, vision, and values out there in the community was something we found ourselves doing a lot of educating about, and I think we'll continue to see that as we go into new areas with new people. And we had a lot of good suggestions from people about how we can improve that messaging. We also saw that with most comments, the most common theme when it came to this organization was, how do we get together to understand what our shared values are? So I think to Sarah's point about where the scenario planner basically picks up is, what are those shared values? And how do we understand that while we are a diverse region, we have more in common than we think we do, and I think talking about values is a good place to actually begin that conversation. With regards to the data, and we've had these conversations amongst ourselves in the board meetings, the idea that the Conditions and Trends platform is just that, it's a platform. It's designed to be a launching point and a repository of information so that on any given day, people can go there and find out what they are, what we're researching and what we're posting. The thing that really was helpful about the engagement in the fourth quarter was that we uncovered a boatload of other data that is not on the Conditions and Trends platform. Studies that had recently been completed, plans that were either underway and somehow missed our radar screen. So in addition, plenty of things for us to continue to build the Conditions and Trends platform site with. And the last thing, probably out of all these general themes, collaboration across the region came up a lot. And it came up a lot in the context of people wanting to know how we were going to do that better. That we talk about it, we have lots of ideas about it, we say we do it, but it's not always done to the best of our ability. So I think that is sort of something that we need to put out there, that as we start moving in the scenario planning direction, that that particular theme really gets addressed and is done in a very intentional and authentic way. So housing. One of the things you'll see here are these asterisks. And what those asterisks represent are not only frequencies, the time these particular themes came up, but when they came up with a lot of different diverse perspectives. And so somebody might be talking about sprawl, and they might be talking about it from a rural perspective or an urban perspective. And there were lots of gray areas. So one of the things that I know we have to be careful with as we move forward is developing the language so that when we say something, we define it, and people can really understand and embrace it, instead of just sort of putting their definition to it and then creating confusion about what that means as we move forward. Two other interesting data points, I think, in this particular cluster of themes was that the idea of educating the general public really came up in a lot of different ways when you talk about how we revitalize neighborhoods, what we're doing for older neighborhoods, and how we ultimately are going to make our development patterns connected. And again, there were a wide array of sub-themes that came into that particular theme, and people agreed to educate people about that. And then the other thing that was interesting was about the comments about the housing and the aging population. About 6 years ago, there was an initiative in Cuyahoga County called the Elder Friendly Community Project that came out of something that the Cleveland Foundation did with the Planning Commission. And it's interesting that 6 years later, that the comments about this issue are even more prevalent and more frequent in terms of the fact that we not only have an aging population, baby boomers getting ready to retire, we have lots of questions that come up about that with regards to vacant housing or moving into different housing, or if the housing is even there. And that quickly got connected to the migration and the sprawl conversation. So when people say sprawl, or say migration, or say housing for older adults, it's a really complex topic. And I think that as we start looking at the housing findings from the AI study, as well as start looking at housing densities and housing typologies, we have to go back to these original comments about we need to think about this not just in terms of a traditional mapping of residential land use, but really what are the needs of people today and in the next 30 to 40 years. In connections, overwhelmingly the conversation about infrastructure and all the different types of infrastructure basically said over and over again it's the region's #1 issue. We can't afford to maintain, we can't afford to keep building like we've been building, and it's not just roads, it's a lot of things that we need to take into account. So message to the scenario planners would be infrastructure is a huge issue that we're going to need to deal with, and I think backing into the values conversation is what are our values about infrastructure?
Is there a clear connection between that and land use and sprawl? I mean, is that an obvious connection that is made?
I think it is, because when people talk about, some of the comments that were made about migration had to do with younger demographics moving back into the central city, and partially because they weren't so concerned about quality education, which gets to the education connection, and the fact that people are moving further out for higher quality schools. And so while we may be talking about infrastructure and roads in a very hard and fast place-based perspective, the market forces are making decisions based on other factors. And so all of those things were very much related in people's comments. And again, education is something that while we're not, I don't believe that people were expecting, you know, some major education policy to be coming out of NEOSCC, we do have to take into account what our K-12 colleges and university systems mean in our region, because that very quickly then gets to how do we leverage our technology connections, and what are we doing to solve our workforce problems. And honestly, across the board, the workforce conversation was very robust in every conversation that we had. And in technology, the comments were mainly about, you know, what do we have to build on and to connect things, and how are we going to do that, and how does technology become infrastructure in terms of economic growth, workforce development, making quality connected places. In environment, overall, I think feedback was that the environment data that was presented clearly, it was understandable, and the top two issues had to do with just brownfield redevelopment and pollution, and things like air quality. And while hydraulic fracturing came up as an issue, it really didn't take up a lot of time, but yet people said that it is something that we will have to take into account when we're thinking about environmental impacts and economic growth, particularly in the parts of the region where there is likelihood of that activity to continue. And then flooding and wetlands were also frequently mentioned, and just basically like, you know, what is a region? We don't have a regional policy for that. So how does flooding and wetlands relate to agriculture and urban farming? So if there was anything that was sort of disconnected in these comments, it was more about how all these things relate if they're sort of under the environmental umbrella. And lastly, the three top themes, transportation, workforce, and business development, really were brought up generally in the same sentence, which is why the frequency is so high. And it really was about the spatial mismatch we have between where the new job centers are, where the transportation networks are, where people live, and where the new kinds of jobs that are being developed, and how people can or cannot get to them. And so I know that's not news to most of you in this room, but I think it is a really important leaping off point for scenario planning, because if we are looking at a no or low growth projections with population, we really do have to look at how those three things connect, because in addition to some other issues related to workforce development that had to do with the quality of the applicant, the ability of businesses to hire people that they need, but they say they can't find skilled people to do that, the connection of just where the jobs are, how people get there, and where they live is sort of the million-dollar question that I think came up in the economic conversation. And the fact that in most of the conversations, people just wanted more information about what's the other data that we're going to feed into the scenario planning inputs. The quote, you know, the statistics that we're going to have 169,000 jobs available in the region. Where are the people going to come and fill those jobs? So the unprofessional key themes, in the first round of workshops with them, there was a lot of asset identification, and so having them talk about what really works in the region. And in the key themes of things where they were talking about what they valued, what was important, I think you see a lot of overlap with the previous 4 slides. Where it was a little different was that they wanted more information about things, so taxes and incentives, understanding infrastructure, how does diversity and inclusion and entrepreneurship work in the economy, but most important really was sustainable development, building community, and looking at collaboration and communication across the region, and things like sustainable practices and local food. So a little bit of a different take on what sustainability means, and I think what that has has taught us is that when we're staying sustainable, and if we are being funded by a HUD grant, that we want to constantly go back to these 6 principles and make sure that what we're doing is continuing to create a common language around what sustainability means and what are the underlying operating principles, if you will, of these particular principles, or the underlying values of these particular principles. So again, getting to Sarah's point about where the actual scenario planners will start, they obviously have a lot to start from, but it's how we craft the conversation as we move forward and using the tools that we already have in our toolkit, and so that we're not reinventing anything, and that we really are looking at how these kinds of principles drive the conversations. Any questions? Lucy?
Your last slide with the young leaders had housing at the bottom. Housing was not an issue at all?
I think in this particular, I'm trying to remember, Jeff, do you remember the exact question? I'm trying to remember the exact question that would have been responded to.
Because I understand your comment about we see so many young people moving into center cities.
Right.
And many of us want to link that to education because of schools, children in schools. And, you know, that is not a true statement anymore, that it's education is not on their list. But is it affordable housing? Is it cost of housing? Or is it the link between transportation and where your job is?
Right. If I can't, I will get the specific answer for you, but my initial recall is that it was more about relationship to transportation networks and just connectivity in general. Oh, Lucy was asking about housing being such a low frequency with the young leader session, the first round, and I was trying to recall what the exact question was.
Okay. Makes sense to me.
Yeah, I actually had a question. So are those arranged by priority?
Yeah.
I wasn't sure what the grouping, okay.
And sort of clustered, you know, in people waiting. Yes.
I missed my window earlier, but I wanted to take this opportunity to do a couple of things. First, I wanted to thank all of you guys for allowing me to attend. Second is to raise my voice, I guess. I just wanted to let you all know I'm here from Senator Sherrod Brown's office, and I represent him in Northeast Ohio. So the NEOSCC footprint is my footprint. So I wanted to, thank all of the board and the staff for allowing me to attend these meetings. They've been very helpful to me. But I also wanted to just offer up to NEOSCC moving into 2013. Use us as a resource, use me as a resource. The network of networks, our office does do convening and those sorts of things. So if there is a way for us to help NEOSCC as a whole, or any of you in your individual communities, I wanted to make sure that you knew I was here and that you can tap us as a resource. And then again, to just thank you guys for all of the good work that you did. Before I was on board, I did one of these young leader meetings and they were awesome. So it's really great to see all of this continuing forward. So I wanted to thank all of you for your work and allowing me to be here, and then also to offer myself and Senator Brown's office as a resource for NEOSCC and all of you moving forward. Sorry for that interruption, but thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, and thanks for your engagement. I know you've been to a couple of our other meetings, and please thank the Senator on our behalf for his interest in this process.
Any other questions? There was another hand back there. All right, if not, what we wanted to do in the time remaining was to give you some time to reflect on these overarching themes, and I'm going to toss this to Sally.
So, I think what's interesting and what's challenging about an initiative that's 12 counties, takes in 12 counties, and 12 counties that are really quite different, that it's important to to get a sense of what's common across this 12-county region.
Speak
And
up,
what
please.
Speak up.
Speak up, please.
Can you hear me
The deaf
now?
person back here is obviously
Fine. My hearing's not that great either. Can you hear me now? Okay. What I was saying is that I think one of the things that's challenging about an initiative that takes in this much from a regional standpoint, 12 counties, and there are 12 counties that are really very different, is that we need to find out what's common, which I think there's been a lot of work that's gone into looking at what are the common themes, because, you know, on one hand, we need to get a sense of what binds us together, and is it real? Does it make sense to us? And on the other hand, we also have to be able to embrace and sort of hold all the differences that this region comprises, all the differences from a community standpoint, a neighborhood standpoint, a municipality standpoint, a county standpoint. And one of the things that's been really clear in the orientation sessions is that the board members, as they're going out and acting as advocates and ambassadors for NEOSCC to their communities, they have to be able to communicate what this initiative is about in a way that makes sense to that community. So oftentimes coming in at it from a sort of a meta level and a thematic level misses if that's all that's included. So what Patty and I were thinking about is that what we'd like to do is give you a chance to get a sense of, you know, what you feel you've learned in 2012 from a general standpoint about what binds this region together, what's common in terms of the general themes from a housing standpoint, connection standpoint, environment, and economy. And then what we'd like to do is ask you to think about and talk about how you would like to use this information and the consortium in a way, or this information to shape the work the consortium is doing in a way that benefits your community. Because that's where the change is going to happen. Change happens on the ground. Yes, Brett?
Can I, not that we'll do it here, but I'd like to make a request if we could, because I thought that set of themes was really, really interesting. But I'm wondering if there is something, Patty, you could do for us, because what I lost in the presentation was the headlines. And so this question of what we have learned in 2012, some of that is empirical and some of that is our judgment. And so maybe the question is, what have we internalized in 2012, which is a different question than what has this process learned. And so if there is a to-do coming out of this meeting, I would really welcome a little matrix that takes the themes and puts them through one axis being, how ubiquitous is it? Like, how often did you hear it? Is everybody in agreement on it? And then the other axis is, what was the level of passion around it? Because just listening to you, it sounds like there's a lot of upper right themes, but I couldn't tell what was upper right and lower left. Mm-hmm. And I think we need you to do that level of synthesis for us, and then we can proceed, and I think we should proceed now, but we can then proceed and say, well, what do we internalize from that? But if people are out there screaming for something in the upper right, I think we need to know that.
Okay. No, that's definitely very doable. And I just, yeah.
So looking at time, and you know, I think one of the things that's common about these meetings is that they tend to consume more time than is allotted, which to me is good because there's a lot to talk about. If we end at 3:30, which is I think is the goal, we have about 15 minutes. And I think you've been listening to a lot of information today. I think sitting and listening, and what we'd like to do is have at least some time to interact with this. So I think, Patty, what do you think about sort of combining these?
I think we can do that.
Combining these two questions with what Brad has sort of modified in terms of what have you internalized? What is the process learned and what have you learned over the past year? And how can you use this information, or how can NEOSCC use this information moving forward to really work in a way that benefits your community? And what we'd like to do is just, if you can just get with, you know, 3 or 4 people that are around you or maybe 3 people, and just talk about this with each other. What have you learned about these common themes? Both, as Brad is saying, empirically, and what have you internalized? And then how can this information be used to really inform the work NEOSCC is doing moving forward in a way that can specifically benefit your community, that you can speak to when you go out as an advocate? We know this isn't enough time to do this, so it's a little appetizer conversation. And so I'll stop talking. Just if you can turn to maybe 2 or 3 other people around you and begin.
And I would just add one more thing to the passion part of the matrix. What is something that you can take away from here being really passionate about? And it might be what you came into the room with, like I'm looking at Freddie and I know what Freddie's going to say when he responds to that question. I think I know. But if there's something else that has come out of your process with this, what is it that you're most passionate about moving into 2013? All right, let's go.
I don't know if we talk about that for longer. Yeah, that we put no longer. Sure. That's what I need out of it. Thank you. Better with you know what I mean? You know what? Bring back that
I know this wasn't much time, but what we want to do as a way of closing this out is just hear from the different groups and just concisely, not a paragraph or a chapter, in the conversation that you were having with the 2 or 3 other folks, what was it that sort of was coming up in terms of how this can inform and shape the work that NEOSCC is doing in 2013 in a way that benefits your community? And where was their passion around what kinds of things? So how can this benefit your communities or your constituents? In some cases, that's probably more accurate. And where was the passion? And David and Greg and George, we'll start with your group.
Okay, basically, first of all, because of the fact that we kind of bounce around in these different theme areas, we actually learned a whole lot. What we did was kind of deepen our knowledge around that and start to wonder how we could tie that to a more regional emphasis and a broader discussion that was tied to regional emphasis rather than a smaller community or county-wide initiative. The other thing I brought up was the fact that I thought that there was a lack of diversity and inclusion in a broad sense throughout all of the things that needs to be broadly connected to everything if we really want to do things differently than in the past. It can't be a bullet point down the line. It has to be something that thematically is tied to everything. And then I think lastly, we talked about the emphasis of really trying to understand how the costs for certain things such as transportation plus energy, those kind of things, really do reflect on creating a new way of thinking and educating people so that in fact they'll have a new way of understanding why these scenarios have broader implications beyond their personal space, their community space.
And the importance of the whole internal, external costs and how a lot of times people don't really fully understand full cost of their behaviors.
Right. So internal being more place-based and more community in the external.
Well, externalities not being factored into people's assessment of their costs.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you. Hallie?
We really focused on the connectivity of all of it, and we really came up with a question more than anything else, and that was, how do we capitalize and connect our assets to improve our region and our communities? So the idea.
You want to repeat that a little bit louder?
How do we capitalize and connect our assets to improve our region and communities. And the idea behind that was the connectivity piece was the common thread, that we have assets in all the general themes, but how do we connect them?
Great question. Right. Thank you. And it sounds like there was a lot of passion in that too.
We were passionate.
Yeah, we were passionate about the connection. Yeah. Sarah, did you and Emma have a conversation around this? Or? Okay, great.
We go on to other.
Okay, go on. And we'll come back to you. Dan, who did you talk with?
I play hooky.
Gotcha. So who's the next group? Corey, did you?
John and Ron.
Yeah.
One went to look for him, but at any rate, our three passionate items, each of us had a different one: housing, economic development, and transportation. Basically talked about connecting those things, similar to what you all mentioned, connecting those things and seeing how we can most effectively maximize the benefit for the community by connecting those three.
Okay, great, thank you. This group back here. Grace.
We talked about housing and how vacancy and blight really contribute to the issues that we have, and it was pretty passionate.
So that was sort of at a universal level as well as something that's shared within the communities.
And I think just trying to get a better sense of, I think one of our challenges in 2013 is to try to get maybe a private sector housing viewpoint into the consortium somehow, so we can understand better what are their challenges and understand the housing market and make progress on what, for the urban core communities, is probably the preeminent issue of sustainability that they're dealing with. How do you regain population? How do you deal with tens of thousands of vacant houses?
And how do you particularly the urban or the first suburbs, how to deal with the obsolescence of housing stock, and is there a market or is there not a market for the housing? When we're looking at the exurbs, is the market because people want to live out there, or is the market because developers can build a bigger house, a new house for less money? And so that becomes attractive.
Yeah, it has more of the amenities that people are looking for today. Okay, great, thank you. We'll come back here. So, group back here.
I'll speak because I was probably the one that got us a little bit off track.
There's always something.
I had a major issue because I was on the Connections Committee, and I didn't feel you had handled, going back our point, very well. Transportation was a major part of Connections, and at least reading this statement, it looked like it had been moved over into economics. I've later been told, well, okay, this represented the input from the field, but I probably we probably spent time straightening me out on that. But I think as part of the general thing, though, there is a sense of some folks that were on some of those input groups, particularly ones that weren't, or that were here from outside, that we didn't get listened to too well. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, great. So it sounds like there was some passion around that too.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Anything else come out of this group? Yes.
Speaking of listening, the other thing we all agreed on, if you're going to meet in this room, those of us in the peanut gallery, you need microphones up there because we miss.
It's hard to hear back there. Yeah, I had the same problem sitting in the back. So thanks for bringing that up for future reference. Next group back here. Yes.
Our group talked about housing and transportation, and Lucy was mostly surprised that housing didn't come up as high on the list, specifically regarding the young leaders.
Yeah.
Usually housing and transportation are related to each other. But anyway, I think we really were concerned about transportation and probably funding of transportation, the lack of that. And also, there are a lot of people who can't afford transportation, who I don't think are in touch with people who cannot. They don't realize how important that is. And so that's something that we really talked about there.
It's a great point to note moving forward, to really emphasize. Group here? Okay.
Oh, thanks, guys. we talked about general themes. We talked about the last couple of years we've been kind of steeped in the present, the past, where we've been in the recent past 10, 20 years. Currently, where are we? and scenario planning where we're going to be. And I think the thought is, how do we jump ahead and think really into the future vision, use our vision into the future 2040. I think that's going to be difficult to break out of that present and that recent past and think really forward, set the foundation for those in the future. The values of those young professionals, they probably wouldn't have been my values when I was that age. And I think in 20 years those values are going to change as well. And the scenario is how do we create scenarios that really reflect the future? So we got kind of philosophical about all this, but it was good discussion.
But I think one key that came out is the predominant number of people that have done this so far have been younger people. It would be interesting to ask a set of questions to them. How do they feel about those things now? And then say, okay, now you're 50 years old. How do you think about those things at 50 years old? So the scenario planning piece here is critical to make sure that you've got a very strong cross-section of individuals, from college-age students to geriatrics, that are talking about what 2040 is going to look like. Because I'm not so sure that any of us are truly thinking about that.
So part of what I'm hearing is the need for agility in whatever scenario or whatever direction, is that agility becomes a pretty important factor, because we don't know. Okay, this next group here.
We talked about three things. First was the idea of balancing off. We're trying to deal with a lot of negative problems, try to balance that off with positives, maybe preface the analysis with what's positive about Northeast Ohio and why people live here and why they're passionate to live here. Second was a kind of a frustration that as a group we've not really grappled so much with the solutions to these things, at least as a group. I mean, we've done a lot of tours, we've presented problems, but we haven't kind of rolled up our sleeves and really focused on what are the solutions to these, and hopefully the scenario planning will lead to that. And then finally, there was somebody brought up the Turnpike and how the debate on the Turnpike was shaped by external forces. In other words, there were leaders along the Turnpike who came forward and objected to the leasing of the Turnpike and shaped that, and some were wondering whether this group could have played that role in that scenario, or moving forward to promote things like the land bank or funding for Clean Ohio, which is really vital to brownfield redevelopment, which if you talk to the inner core mayors, they'll talk about how important that is to revitalizing those communities, and yet it seems at the state level that emphasis on brownfield redevelopment is waning. And so can this group play a role as the budget comes up in the state promote those issues?
Yes, volunteers.
No, well, in our group, we kind of talked about land use patterns and trends. We kind of talked about land use trends throughout the region, and how basically, if you look at the way the population is and how basically it's either been stagnant or shrinking in certain areas, the trends or the patterns for how we use land in our area are putting a lot of strain on systems, transportation systems, economic systems, infrastructure to uphold those things. And we just think that it's unsustainable, and it's something that definitely needs to be looked at and addressed moving forward.
Any other comments? Wonderful, thank you. The last group? Bring us home.
We were all over the place. So I'm gonna let them speak for
where'd you
themselves. So I'm gonna speak for me first.
If we can keep it brief, I'm just looking at the time.
Sure. One of the things that, as I looked at all of the topics there, the positive is that I think these are all common ground issues. If we can't have a conversation around these things, we can't have a conversation, number one. Number two, I think that one of the things that's really important that we should always try to keep in the back of our mind is, even though we have these very clear sort of thematic topics, that there are drivers that permeate throughout all these things that really have dictated the choices that we made in each one of these things. Like, for example, education, health, equity. These are all things that I think have influenced our housing choice. For example, when we talk about the out-migration,
of inner city residents. A large part of that was due to education. So I think we have to sort of pay attention to the DNA that kind of drives the decisions that we make in relationships to these themes. I don't think we go to sort of the roots enough to understand what's driving our decisions when it comes to transportation, housing, etc.
Thank you.
Well, I agree with what Greg Brown said earlier. It's the fact that when you look at the transportation choices and the cost to the lower income families, transportation, energy, housing, when that's done, what's left? And how those areas are critical all over Northeast Ohio, and how can we improve the transportation to get the people to the jobs so that things can change.
Thank you. Don?
I guess what I was impressed with, what I had learned about in 2012 was really the complexity of the region. I mean, for Northeast Ohio, for as big as it is, when you're sitting here, for the most part, you look at it on a map, it's a small part of the country. We haven't changed all that much, it would seem, in the last 50 years, literally. I mean, population hasn't changed or whatnot, but yet it's a very complex region, and I think that was brought out. Surprisingly, probably what I was most passionate about, or the passion that developed over the year in working on this, was besides getting my local people engaged so I can step back and go back into just doing normal work rather than representation type of thing of a vast, diverse group of people from Lorain County, was really the connections and the transportation. Kind of starting with land use is the DNA of the area, if you want to build it up with biological, and then our transportation and our infrastructure systems then being that skeleton that everything else is built off of then. So that was it.
Well, thank you. Patty, do you have any closing comments?
No, I just want to thank everybody who participated in all of the engagement workshops, and we'd really like you to continue to think about your list of commitments, specifically as an individual, as we move into 2013, and hopefully after planning session with the NEOSCC team, there will be a lot more clarity, which is the other thing that I know you've all been asking for about what does 2013 look like. So I think it's just around the corner, and maybe that's our Christmas present to each other. Thank you.
It's just a quick announcement. The venue has changed from the flip side to the Red Door. The Red Door is actually the restaurant a little bit closer to the service. So, I think the size of our crowd will be kind of oversized the flip side. So
Okay. Yeah, and to that end, I'd like to thank.
I just want to compliment everybody on the moving the meetings to different counties. I think that was really an eye-opener for everybody. I think it really built community in this group as well. I think that's been very successful. I look forward to more of it next year.
And actually, one more thing, Mayor Curran walked in after Jason, you had asked for public.
Yeah, I was going to get to Mayor Curran. we had a conversation. Go ahead, Mayor Curran.
Thank you for having us.
Well, I also think it was a great idea to move around to different counties. We hosted here for about a year. We're happy to see you back here in our, at least my favorite town, Hudson. And we want to make sure that the leadership of Hudson plays its appropriate role within the region to support your efforts and also to cheer your efforts on. It is apparent to me in visiting with you today that your work has been long and hard, and difficult decisions are being made and are yet to be made. Yet we have the future ahead of us, and what you're doing right here certainly is so very, very important to that. So I know some of you have been over to the Red Door before because I was with you at that time. Okay, some of you are smiling, you don't remember. But it's a wonderful place to be. I think it's a good idea to move over because it's a little bit more spacious, Jeff, than the flip side. But certainly let's enjoy a nice social time after this, and I'll be there for sure. Thank you very much for being in Hudson. We welcome you.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'd just like to give a special thank you to the staff for this year, this has been a busy year. This has been the first full year of business with the consortium, with having a full staff, and I think it's been a learning experience working as a very complicated organization between all our moving parts, the work streams, the executive committee, the staff, the board, and thank all of you as board members too for the passion that you put into this, for the fortitude and perseverance this day alone at this long meeting, but really throughout the year. So thanks to all of you, and maybe some closing comments.
Also, I think we should give a thanks to Jason for serving as our chairman. It's been a rough year.
Thanks. Any closing comments for the good of the order? And if not, I would entertain a motion to adjourn to the one red door. Yeah, Mike.
I move to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
Motion to second. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
I think the ayes have it.